Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Rochelle if you're new here, and I am going to do a recap for the month of August. So the month of August actually turned out to be a way better reading month for me, which is really wild because I did not think it would turn out that way. I thought that because of the friends trip we had at the beginning of the month, I wouldn't get the chance to do any reading, but boy was I wrong. I believe this was actually the best reading month I've had so far. And so we're gonna go through the books that I read throughout the month of August. I read a total of 14 books. And at first I thought it was 13, but it turned out that Storygraph wasn't counting one of the books I read, so I had to fix that before I started filming this. So because I really love looking at all the stats, I have my Storygraph here, and it says that I read a total of 14 books, which is 4,204 pages. How wild is that? I did not think that I read that much, and I think it's so satisfying to see the total amount of pages that you've read. So that was really cool. And then it says the average time to finish books for me was around 6 days or so, which makes sense because there were some books that took me a little bit longer to finish and then others that I just read so quickly. You're not aware, I was actually doing a book bingo for Petal Pages, which is a group that I'm now a part of. They have a stream team on Twitch, and then they also have a bunch of people that create on YouTube like me that are also a part of their team as well. So I was doing this summer reading book challenge that they had for the entire summer, and I had a bunch of books that I needed to catch up on for the month of August. I was being very stubborn and I wanted to get a complete blackout for my bingo board, and so it was definitely kind of the final push towards the last couple days of the month. I don't really want to go through the rest of the stats too much because I feel like with Storygraph it actually takes the stats that I'm kind of giving to the books, and I'm not always for certain on the moods or certain things there. But of course, the top genres that I read for the month were horror, young adult, and thriller. And then the lowest ones were kind of all tied at the end, so speculative fiction, dystopian, classics, poetry, fantasy, crime, and comics. They were kind of all at the end. And then the average rating that I had was 3.93 when it came to the books I read. Let's go into which books I read. I think I'm gonna continue doing lowest to highest. I did really like that. It is a little bit different for my brain to do, so I have to kind of scroll through the books and see like which order they're in. So starting with the lowest, I'm gonna go with Bird Box by Josh Malerman. My fiance and I actually listened to this on Audible, and we started listening to it when we went to our trip to Tennessee, which I actually do have a vlog for, so I'll make sure to include it if you haven't watched it already. It's very fun. It's kind of a vlog style and then shows a haul at the end of the video. So if you're interested in any of those things, I have it attached. But yeah, Charles and I, we had a really long road trip, so we started listening to it then, and then we didn't get to finish it on the drive back, but we did listen to it when we were driving up to Grand Junction for our friends trip at the beginning of August, and we finally finished it. I rated this one 3 stars. It was so painful. Now, I love books that are dystopian and survival-esque, apocalyptic, anything like that, but the thing that we had an issue with was the main character, Mallory. She was so wishy-washy. There would be moments where she's like, okay, I'm gonna do this. Oh, but I'm not sure if I'm gonna do this. And oh, I wish this so-and-so was here, and yada, yada, yada. And it was just like, girl, stick with the decision. Like, trust your gut. You know that something feels off. Go for it. Just like speak your mind. Like, stop being wishy-washy. And I know that there's a movie on Netflix with Sandra Bullock, and to be honest, I prefer the movie so much more over the book. Maybe it was the narrator reading it, but I just was not a fan of the character, and I liked the movie a lot better. I liked how strong the main character was and how she wasn't taking any crap from anyone. So if you're ever interested in that story, I would highly recommend the movie over the book. And that's kind of one of those rare instances where it's like one is better than the other. And then next one I actually read as an arc. It was When the Sky Falls, Dark Skies Apocalypse, Book 1, and it's by B.R. Spangler. and I rated this one 3 stars as well. I listened to this one as an audio arc, and I was truthfully very excited about it. It sounded very apocalyptic and everything. With this story, basically, there's this thing that happens, and it turns out it's these machines that are kind of changing the climate and creating this whole mist that if you go into it, there's a chance that you're going to die. And it truly did kind of remind me of the movie The Mist, and there were some aspects I did like about the book, but then some that I did not. I really loved the beginning chunk about it, because you're kind of following around this older sister that's taking care of her younger sister and trying to go and survive with a bunch of other survivors in this mall. But I don't know if the author was trying to rush through things or just didn't really know how to wrap things up, but it felt like the book was in 2 different portions, and the first part was so good, but then the second part just felt very rushed and not well thought out, and some of the characters that had these amazing qualities that I really liked and made me root them on lost those qualities in the second half, and it just kind of fell flat for me, which is why I rated it 3 stars. Then I had The Madness by Dawn Kurtagich, and this one, I believe I had someone on my Instagram that was actually talking about it. I had an e-arc for this one, and a lot of the e-arcs that I get are usually from NetGalley, but there is the rare chance that I'm able to get some through Threads when I hear about an author's book and see that they have a sign up to potentially get early access to their book. But yeah, so I read this one. I was really intrigued. I heard a lot of people that did get early copies really raving about it, so I picked it up, and it actually did fit one of the prompts on the bingo sheet that I had. So I started this one a little bit before our friend's trip and then kept reading it then. And it kind of seemed like it was a retelling of Dracula, but more from the female protagonist's point of view. She was a psychiatrist. She had some trauma in her past, but of course with trauma, you're kind of remembering it in different ways. So she didn't really see what exactly happened during that situation until later in the book. And she moved away from her hometown. Her mom was kind of looked at as this wacky, kooky individual who just believed in a lot of fairy tales, and no one ever put any seriousness into it. And there were a lot of really cool aspects in it, but at the same time, I rated it 3.5 just because I don't know, like there was a way that I just wasn't really getting fully invested in the book, and then there were a few like body horror things. So with me personally, some skin stuff really creeps me out, and with how it was described, like I'm even getting goosebumps right now, but it creeped me out so much. I just felt that I really forced myself to finish this book a lot quicker, and maybe that affected how much I actually enjoyed this book. But that's why I rated it 3.5 stars. If you do like Dracula retellings, especially wanting to get more from the female's point of view, then this might be a book for you, but it personally wasn't really for me. It just didn't hit the mark in some spots that I wanted it to. Then the next book that I have is My Sister, the Serial Killer by Oyinkan Braithwaite, and I rated this one 3.5 stars as well. It was really good. I did get recommended this one by one of my fellow booktubers. I'll insert her information here as well as in the description. But I remember she had been talking about it, I think a month or 2 ago, and she told me that I should listen to it through audiobook. And I am really glad that I listened to it that way, especially with the name pronunciations and just getting like an extra feel for the culture and everything. But unfortunately, this book also didn't hit the mark for me. The main character ends up going and hiding a murder of her sisters. Her sister ended up going and killing her boyfriend, and kind of gives these like vague reasons and excuses, makes up these stories, but the older sister loves her sister so much and just ends up going and cleaning up all of these things for her, but at the same time doesn't want her to kind of get attached with anyone, especially when it comes to her work. And at her work, one of the doctors there. She is very much hoping to one day date. She has a huge crush on him, but unfortunately he ends up going and meeting her sister and ends up wanting to date her instead. And the sister is kind of unsure what to go and do, doesn't really want those two to get connected at all, and tries to give like these vague hints. And I think for me, I didn't really like the main character as much. Like, I felt for her a lot, but I think since I'm actually an only child, so in some ways I couldn't fully relate to the main character and wanted her to do certain things differently, but of course I don't understand things fully from her point of view as I'm an only child. So I think because of that, that's why I rated it a little bit lower. It was a really good book, but yeah, that's kind of how I felt on it. If you did want to read this book, I do recommend the audiobook because it was really well done. I really liked the narrator, and like I said, it really helped with the pronunciation, especially of the names, but I guess it was just so frustrating. I think that's the best word for it. It was so frustrating because I really wanted the main character to go a certain way and do certain things, but she just always held herself back because of how much she loved her sister. And so, yeah, that's why it's at a 3.5 for me. Next, we have another ARC that I happened to get. This one was Pumpkin Spice and Poltergeist. It's Maple Hollow book number 1, and it's by Elle K. Mulford and Elle Morrison. And I actually heard about this one through Threads. I believe it comes out September 3rd, if I'm not mistaken. And this one I also rated as a 3.5 as well. So the story involves both Jordan and Harlow, and it goes between both of their point of views. Jordan ends up going and doing a spell to go and bring back the ghost of her ex-girlfriend because she basically has some unresolved things that she would like to go and say to her ex-girlfriend. However, she doesn't do things correctly, and the ex-girlfriend ends up sticking around as a ghost because of some unresolved business on her end. And Jordan's believing that it's because she has not moved on to a new relationship since her ex-girlfriend died in an accident. We're not entirely sure. So Jordan's kind of stuck with the ghost, and then Harlow moves into town and ends up going and working at her sister's cafe. She's kind of known as being a bit of a mess up. Things never go according to plan, and she's moving in with her sister in hopes that things will kind of get put back into place and she won't feel like so much of a screw up. And the two end up going and meeting each other and kind of developing a little bit of a romance. It's really cute because this town is, I guess, like a mixture of Gilmore Girls and Halloween Town in a way, except instead of people thinking that all of these monsters around this town are real, they actually think that they're just in costume and have like this great makeup and fake magic effects that they're doing. So it was very cute. I wasn't a fan of the spice, but I knew there was spice going into it. There's only 2 scenes and they are open doors, so just be aware of that if you do decide to pick this book up. But it was very cute at the same time. I loved a lot of the different pieces with that small town, and it definitely was a town that I personally would love to visit. Maybe it's because I also love Halloween and I love fall as well, but that was one of the pieces that I really, really enjoyed about the book. I also loved the descriptions of both characters. I loved seeing things from their points of view, and honestly, I think this would be a very great cozy read, especially for the fall season. And then I have Eat Your Heart Out by Kelly deVos, and this one was one of the prompts that I had for my bingo board. It was a book that had positive fat representation, and I actually got this one recommended to me by someone that is on the Petal Pages team, so I'll also include their information below. But yeah, I was very intrigued in this one. I actually had plans to read it for a different reading video I had in the back burner to do, but since it fit one of the prompts, I was like, okay, let's go and read this. So I also obviously love zombies, and you can tell that there's zombies here with the main character. I just loved the way the art on the cover was. It was really what drew me in, even though it is very much pink, and pink is not usually a color that I'm drawn to at all. But yeah, with this book, basically the main character as well as a bunch of other kids are all sent to this fat camp. And they're all very rich, and their families are like, you need to lose weight. So right away with this story, it's, you know, going to one of these camps, losing weight, being on restrictive diets and all that type of stuff. And you do get to go and see things from each of the kids' points of view when they go to this camp. However, things kind of go off to a bad start. This is in Arizona, there's a blizzard, and then suddenly there's apparently someone missing by the lake, but no one's telling them who or what happens. And once they get to the camp, they're all noticing that the camp counselors kind of seem off. Like there's something going on, but they're not quite sure what. And I did really like this book. I enjoyed it. I loved some of the characters and their strong personalities. I also love the positive representation, especially for fat people in this, and how the main character that's on this cover, she was just, I gotta say it, she was so badass, and she was very smart, she was very knowledgeable, and she's definitely one of those people that I'd love to have in my group for a zombie apocalypse, not even gonna lie. But the reason why this book felt a little bit shorter for me was because of some of the qualities they gave to the zombie characters. I'm very picky when it comes to zombies because I'm just a huge zombie lover, and I was enjoying it up until a certain moment. I'm like, really? Really? Okay. So that's just kind of where I felt that way, but it was a really great read. I very much enjoyed it, and I definitely am curious to read more by this author. Then I have A Time to Dance by Padma Venkatraman, and I rated this one 4 stars. I actually did a buddy read with my friend Kat for this book, and it was very much a quick read. Super easy to go through, as you can tell by the pages. And it, of course, had limb difference representation, which is something that I absolutely love and is very important to me, especially with books that I read and pick up, with having positive disability representation. So the main character in the story, she is a dancer, and she's going to all these competitions and everything. Her mom doesn't exactly approve of this life direction that her daughter's taking, and of course would like her to go into a career that would make more money. And after a competition, there's a horrific accident, and unfortunately the main character ends up losing one of her legs. And, you know, she's dealing with the whole process of acceptance and wondering if she's ever going to accomplish her dream to become a dancer. So she's dealing with a lot of those things and a lot of regrets and hurt. But then it turns out she's able to go and get a prosthetic limb. However, going and figuring out how to dance is kind of proving to cause some complications. So it was really interesting. Like I said, a really quick read. I very much did enjoy it. But yeah, I rated it around a 4.0 just because I wanted more, I guess. You know, right where the story ended, it made perfect sense. But sometimes with stories, you know, you just want to read more. You want to know what keeps happening instead of just leaving it up to the imagination. So yeah, that's kind of why I left it at a 4 star, but it was a very great read, very quick, and of course had representation. So, you know, why not pick it up? All right, and then I have Silence in the Shadows by Darcy Coates. This is the very last book in the Black Winter series, and if you've been following for a while, you know that I have been obsessed with this book series. I have been kind of holding myself back a little bit and reading one book in the series a month, and I am so sad that it's finally over. I'm definitely gonna have to pick up more books by Darcy Coates, but the reason why I had this one at 4 stars was because I just didn't love it as much as the other ones. I believe the 3rd book was the one that I rated the highest, and that was probably the one that I enjoyed the most. And this one was still really good. It also did tie up a lot of loose ends, especially at the end of the book, but I think with this one, it just felt like certain events were very rushed, whereas the other books, it kind of had those moments dragged out more and had more little details in them. Whereas with this one, it was like, all right, we're going from this point to this point to this point. Like, it just, the flow was a lot quicker, and although, you know, it tied up those loose ends and everything, there weren't any remaining questions or lingering questions for me that were going to bother me after finishing this series. It just didn't hit the mark as much as the other books did for me, but I still highly recommend the series, and I probably will be rereading it again in the future, so keep an eye out for this series. And then I have Snowglobe by Soyoung Park, and this one I also rated 4 stars. I also didn't realize, so we have to look at this real quick. So beautiful, and then also the insides. Like, this book was just absolutely stunning. So if you don't know, this book is actually translated. This is actually one of the first translated books that I've ever read before, and I'm so glad that I finally got to read it because it did fit one of the bingo prompts that I needed for the month of August. And with this one, the main character, she's living outside of the Snowglobe with her family, and outside of the Snowglobe is very cold, very isolated, and the only way that you can kind of survive there is by working in the plant, and you're riding these bikes that go and hook up to this energy that is used to supply the Snowglobe, which is where a lot of these actors end up living. And in the Snowglobe, basically, your life is always on display if you are one of the actors. And if you're not an actor, you're a director, and you're a director that's basically running this TV show, and if it doesn't work well and is canceled, there's the chance that you get kicked out of the Snowglobe, or you go to the retirement camp that is also outside of the Snowglobe. And basically this main character, she is going to her daily job, but then ends up going and somehow coming across a really famous director that needs her to go and play the part of this actress that died, who somehow she ends up looking really similar to. And this book was so interesting. I've never read anything that had the same plot or theme along this line. Like, I guess you could compare it in a way to Hunger Games, just with the rich people going and watching the lower class people on TV, but switched around when it comes to this book. And it just was so interesting, and I really did enjoy it. So yeah, it was rated at 4 stars. There actually is going to be, I think, another book. I want to say this is a duology, and the next book should be out in spring of 2025. But the ending of the book kind of confused me a little bit. Like, there was a resolution, but also some parts that didn't entirely make sense, especially with one character's epilogue that was shown up at the end, and it just didn't make sense for me personally. I felt like it should have showed up elsewhere in the book for it to fully make sense. So I am curious. I definitely do want to read the next book in the series, but yeah, the ending just confused me a little bit, but the entire story was really good. I loved how different it was to other books that I've read, and yeah, I definitely want to continue this series, and it's beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful. Then the next book I actually listened to as an audiobook, and it was The Tattooist of Auschwitz, and it's by Heather Morris. I listened to this one because one of the prompts in the bingo board was reading a book that you don't normally read, or from a genre you don't normally read. And with this book, I just kind of had it on my list eventually to pick up, but I knew that I would get really emotional. It would be a very difficult book to read. So that was kind of why I always pushed it kind of to the back burner and wasn't in any rush to pick it up. It was really great, but of course talked about, you know, Nazi Germany and just the awful things that happened during the Holocaust. It was a really difficult story, of course, to listen to, and the details of a lot of the gruesome events that took place, but it was a great read. I loved that there were obviously some historic pieces, because there were some interviews that I believe the author did and went and told some of their stories in the book. So it was a historic fiction, I believe, and it was really great. I had it at 4.25 stars, but also very difficult to read at the same time and listen to, so that's all I have to say there. Alright, and then the next one I have is The Walking Dead Volume 1, Days Gone By Robert Kirkman. I went and borrowed this book or this comic, and at first, like, the reason why I went and picked it up was because I really needed something quick that would go and work for the bingo prompt that I had, and also because I really love The Walking Dead. It's one of my favorite series of all time. I have not finished the very last season. I kind of put it off for a while just because I didn't want it to end, and then I need to catch up on a few of the spin-offs. But yeah, I went and picked this one up, and it was really interesting to kind of look back on it because I've never read the comics before. So just kind of seeing the little differences with Rick and how they had him portrayed in the comic and then had him portrayed in the show. And I really did like some of the directions that they went for some of the characters, but I also did like some of the changes that they went in the TV show. I really thought that they did really well with the changes that they did, at least for the first book. I don't really know how things changed in any of the other ones, but I definitely do want to continue reading the comics because, I mean, it's The Walking Dead. I love zombies, come on. But yeah, so I really liked that. And I already knew, and I'm sorry if I'm spoiling this for you, but Daryl Dixon is not actually a character that is in the comics. He was created for the TV show. And it's so wild going and reading the comic and being like, oh, Daryl should show up at any second, and then realizing, oh wait, no, he doesn't exist in this. So that was really interesting as well. But yeah, so that's why I rated it what I did. Who knows, maybe I'll read some more of the books, especially since we're in my favorite fall season, and it seems like some perfect reads for that time of year. And then the next one I have is Safe Haven by Nicholas Sparks, and I rated this one 4.5 as well. So the reason I picked this one up was because I needed to reread a favorite book. This was one that I read when I was younger, and I think I've read a couple times. So this time was my third time picking up this story. It's probably one of my favorites by Nicholas Sparks. I don't really read romance or contemporary romance all that much anymore, but this one was always one of my favorites and that I would reflect and think about often. I did actually film a video going and sharing my thoughts. I wanted to do this little series where it's rereading books that I rated 5 stars and seeing if they still hold up. So I don't want to talk about it too much, but I did very much enjoy it. And I really do want to rewatch the movie, especially since I read this so recently, just to see the differences. But yeah, 4.5 stars. And then I read Kindred by Octavia E. Butler. This one I rated 4.75 stars. I actually read this one when I was in college. I believe the class was called Gender and Sexuality in American Pop Culture. It was truly one of my all-time favorite classes that I've ever taken, and I remember it so fondly. And if I ever were to want to go back to college for whatever reason, it would be for classes that were like that. But yeah, this book was very good. It was so different. So with the main character, Dana, she's a black woman, and she ends up going and moving into a new home with her husband. And while they're going and sorting through some of their stuff, trying to get their new home organized, she suddenly feels dizzy and is transported to this strange place. And she ends up going and rescuing a little kid, not really understanding what exactly is going on, but realizing, okay, he needs help. And then after a little bit, she's suddenly transported back to the current day. And she realizes that what is happening is, for whatever reason, she's getting drawn back to the past in a time where slavery is still very apparent in the culture. And she learns that this little boy that she rescued is related to her, and he's like her great-great-great-great-grandfather. So she wonders if the reason why she's getting called to the past is to go and rescue him to make sure that her family line still exists so that she's born. And the duration of the time that she gets transported kind of varies, and how she ends up coming back to the current day also varies. So she's trying to go and survive in both worlds and also readjust and figure out like, okay, something that I do would be okay in this time, but not in this time. So survival is very apparent. This book is so good. I highly recommend it. There is a lot of difficult topics such as rape and of course slavery, and just a lot of the very difficult and gruesome things that happen. But at the same time, this is such a good read, and I definitely think that everyone should read this at some point in their lives. But yeah, I finally got the chance to reread it, and I'm very glad I did. And also, I'm obsessed with the copy that I have of this book. And then the last book I have is Come Out, Come Out by Natalie C. Parker. I actually got this one as an ARC, and then I loved it so much and had to get a physical copy. So this book is actually rated at 5 stars. And the reason I decided to put this book at 5 stars was because bless you, Nugs, was because of the amount of emotion that this book made me feel. I was in tears in various points. So this book is actually a horror, but it kind of covers a lot of different types of horror. So with this book, it's taking place in a small town in the Pacific Northwest, and this town is extremely religious to the point where if you don't present a certain way, there is the chance that you can be zeroed out. And with these two characters, they're both dealing with various differences of being a part of the LGBTQIA+ community, but not necessarily understanding or knowing where they're at. And at the beginning of the book, they're both friends and running away from something, but suddenly they cross this line and their memory's wiped. And then it goes back to a few years later. These two aren't really friends anymore. One girl, she's in the church, she has a boyfriend, and is just, you know, playing along with the perfect life that her parents, especially her mother, has planned out for her. The other character is in theater, and they are doing a version of Grease. But this version is completely different because it doesn't matter what gender you are, you can sign up for any role. And this is kind of creating this huge whirlwind in the town because this is something that's never been done before. And the theater director's like, I might get fired for doing this, but we're gonna do this. And so the main character, she doesn't really know for sure if she wants to sign up for Sandy or for Danny. She knows that she should sign up for Sandy because all of her family members are very talented and they went on to huge careers after getting the lead role in the musical. And so there's a lot of pressure for her to go and fulfill this role. But when it comes to signing up for the part that she's auditioning for, she kind of lingers under, should I go and sign up for Danny's role as well? And there's a lot of different aspects in this book. Number one, the fear of going and coming out, not knowing for sure, are you going to be accepted? Are the people that you love and care about, whether they're your friends, whether they're your family, are they going to accept you for these differences? But also, there's this house that basically has this fairy tale or folklore around it where this guy that ran this orphanage, he ended up going and passing along with the kids in the orphanage that died in a fire. And there's this thing that if you make a wish there, that he'll go and grant it. And there's some aspects also tied into that. I don't want to give away too much, but at the same time, I've seen some people talk about this book and get upset about the horror that is present in this book. And I think that it doesn't just cover the paranormal aspect, but also a very real thing that people today still might deal with. So yeah, just keeping that in mind. But I truly did love this book so much. After I finished reading it, like I said, I had to go and order my own copy of it. And my fiance, who is an elementary school counselor, he really wants to read this book as well. So yeah, I do really recommend this one, but I think that, of course, you know, checking your trigger warnings, but also having a little bit more in the back of your mind when you're going into this book and realizing that there's a lot of different reasons that this book is in the horror category, if that makes sense. But yeah, so that is all the books that I read for the month of August. And like I said, it's really wild that I read 14 books. I don't know how I did it because, that was a lot of reading, but at the same time, it was really exciting to kind of look at my stats at the end of the month. I don't know for sure if I'm gonna have a TBR for September because I kind of did that when I talked about the Phantom Readathon, which I am going to be a part of. So if anything, we might do some reading vlogs or little videos like that, just because I don't want to kind of film the same thing and talk about the same books, if that makes sense. But yeah, I hope you liked this, and if there were any books that I read that you've read before or that you'd like to read, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And as always, if you liked this video, please leave a like and potentially subscribe to my channel because I really do love talking about books so much, and it's just fun knowing that there's other people that enjoy this as well. So yeah, I'm gonna wrap things up now, but thank you so much for being here. I love you all, and remember that you're worthy and capable of amazing things. Bye.